Hi class. So this is going to be a short video talking about some features in Excel. So I'm assuming that you already read the sections in Chapter A like I had asked you to do beforehand, and kind of get a good feel for Excel. So one thing that I like to do in this part is to create a multiplication table, right? I think it's helpful just to learn how to play around with the different functionalities in Excel. So I would try to replicate what I'm doing, so that way it can really stick with you, right? So I'm going to type in 1 into cell A2, right? So notice here that the columns are labeled with letters and the rows here with numbers. So it's called the cell address, is where that cell is, right? If you notice here on the left, my cursor's in cell A2 and it's labeled, right? So I'm putting 1 as an input into cell A2, right? So that's just storing that value, right? So then if I click in cell A3, I can create a formula that will add 1 to it each time, right? If I want to create a multiplication table. So in order to enter a formula into Excel, you have to tell Excel that you want a formula by putting equals first, right? So this includes when you do handwritten assignments for me. When I ask you for a formula, it must start with equals, right? For a Excel formula, right? So we hit equals, and then now I can use the cell addressing function, right? So if I click in cell A2, notice it writes A2 for me, right? So you can just click what cell you want to reference, or you can type in A2, and it'll also work, right? So what I want to do in cell A3 is take the cell above it and add 1 to it, right? So I do +1, I equals, right? So now when I drag, so now if I click on the cell and put my cursor in the bottom right hand corner, notice my cursor changed to this cross, right? And this is called the fill handle. So now if I hold down my left click on my mouse and drag down, right? Then this is called filling down, right? So I'm filling down the cell, right? So this type of addressing is called relative cell addressing, right? So it's not absolute, because absolute is where you're locking in, where you don't want the cell reference to change, right? But relative cell addressing changes as I pull down. It takes the cell above it and adds 1, right? So for example, if I click in cell A5 here, notice the formula in this cell is the cell above it, which is A4 +1, right? So if I double click in cell A12, right, notice it's taking the cell above it +1, right? So Excel's very smart in doing this, right? Because that's what I told um, in cell A3, that's what I told Excel to do, right? Take the cell above and add 1 to it. So then when I fill down, it's always going to keep the same exact pattern, right? So this is very useful in Excel. And if I didn't want that to change, right? What I could do is use dollar signs, right? So like if I use dollar sign in front of the A, that's gonna lock down the column, right? So if I'm dragging down, that doesn't matter, right? The column, because column, if you lock in the column, that would only matter if you're pulling it left and right, right? Um, and then I could also put a dollar sign in front of the 2, right? Which would be if I pull down, right? So I'm just going to put a dollar sign in front of the 2 just to show you what would happen if I fill this down now, right? So now notice, by putting a dollar sign in front of the 2, what I told Excel to do is to fix the row. So don't change the row 2. Don't let that change if I fill down, right? So notice all these are the same, right? So if I click in cell A9, it's the same formula as I had typed in earlier, right? So that locks it in, right? So this would actually be a mixed cell reference Absolute cell reference is where you're locking in the row and the column. And then relative cell addressing is where you're not locking down anything. And then in this case, when I'm using just one $sign, this would be example of a mixed cell reference, right? So I'm gonna delete this $sign because that's not what I want it to do, right? And then another thing you can do is, since I already have Excel already knows I'm working with this range of numbers, if I double click instead of drag down, it will automatically just fill down to where I was using those values, right? So Excel's very smart, right? So then again, I'm still creating a multiplication table, so I'm going to put an X here, and I'm going to center this. Center these values, right? In fact, I want to center my whole chart, right? So if I click here, that highlights everything, right? So then I can click the center button here, and that will center all my content, right? So there's different ways to format Excel, but the way I explain it is, when you format in Excel, you're not changing the value put in. What you're doing is making it look pretty, right? You're changing like the cosmetic, right? You're like giving it a haircut, putting makeup on, right? Making it look better, but the person, the values are still the same, right? So you'll see that throughout. So I'll make this yellow. I'll make these, I don't know, how about like light green, right? I can also go in and add some border. Right, so now we can see the lines more apparently, right? So then here I'm going to type in 1, and then in this cell I'm going to do equals, and what we want is take the cell to the left, which is B1, and add 1 to it, right? So now when I pull this across, then I can get these values, right? So I'll make this a color too. Let's do like a blue, and I'll hit this so I can see the rows easily, right? So now what I want to be able to do is, I want to be able to put in a formula where if this value, right, I want this to show me 3 times 3, right? This cell times this cell, right? That's the goal, is to be able to create a formula where I can fill down and to the right, and give me the values when I multiply these numbers together, right? So you probably made or seen one of these charts before when you're learning your times table, right? That's what we're trying to replicate. So I need to try to figure out a formula to put in Excel, right? So if I hit equals, and then I hit A2 times B1, right? This is an appropriate Excel formula for this particular cell, B2, right? But what happens when I pull down, right? I get 2, but let's see if it is multiplying the right things together, right? So it's not, right? So what we're doing is taking this cell, which is right, and multiplying by the one above, which it should be multiplying by B1. This should be B1 here, not B2, right? So what that means is, when I pull this down, I want to lock in the row for cell B1, right? So let me delete this and go back up to this formula. So this is called the formula bar, right? So you can edit the formula here also. Sometimes it's easier to type. So I want to put a $sign in front of the row for B1, right? But I don't want it in front of A2, right? Because when I pull this down, I want this blue box to pull down with it, right? So I want that to stay the same. So now when I pull this down, let's see if it's right. Right, it's right, right? So it's taking this blue box times the red box, right? Which is what we want, right? So again, I'll just double click here, and Excel's smart, it'll carry all the way down. So let's just try one to make sure it's multiplying right? So it is. It's multiplying the correct boxes together, right? So when we multiply things, we want it to be the green and the blue boxes, right? So now what happens if I pull this over this way, right? What happens? So we get 2, which is right, But this blue box should be here, A2. So, so I want to lock in the column then for A2, right? So I want to put a $sign in front of A2 then, right? So now let's see if that works, if I can pull that over to the right. Right? Yeah, so now it's multiplying the right things together, right? So this formula should be correct, right? So I can it works downward, right? So I'm going to pull this down. And then it will also work to the right, right? So if I pull this down to the right, it should work fine, and it is, right? Alright, so another thing you can do in Excel is notice I want to pull this all the way over, this row all the way over, and so forth to finish the table. But one thing we can do in Excel is I can just highlight all of this, and then I can either pull this over like this, and it will do all that for me, right? Or alternatively, you can use that double click feature, right? So I can highlight this range, right? These formulas I want to pull over, and I can just put my cursor over there where it becomes the fill, the fill bar. And if I double click, oops, it's not wanting to pull over, right? There, but it should pull right over, but it's not wanting to for some reason, right? So that's how to make a multiplication table. So in doing this, right, we learned or applied absolute versus relative cell addressing, right? So in all these addressing, we use mixed, right, which is in between, right? So in one, in the A2, we need to lock in the column, but in B1, we needed to lock in the row, right? So both of those are mixed, right? So we learned how to apply the $sign. We learned that you need to use an equal sign to signify a formula in a cell. We also learned that you can click on a cell to reference it, or you can type it in. Also, this formula bar here, you can type in and work in this formula bar to type things in. Another feature, we can zoom in and out, right? On this bottom right, there's plus and minus. So that's just helpful to be able to view the Excel sheet nicely. And then I showed you a little bit about formatting these cells, so make them look pretty and presentable, right? It helps you organize your information, right? And just to point out, right, what I mean by Excel, you're just showing values, right? So like if I do equals 11 divided by 3, right, I get this value, 3.666667, right? So let me type over here what's showing, 3.12346 is 7, right? So what I want to do is I'm going to do times, let's say 3, right? And over here I'll do times 3. And I'm going to put a bottom border. So if we do a bottom border for this cell, it'll put a line at the bottom. So it kind of looks like a equal sign, if you will, right? Like a traditional multiplication algorithm, right? So then if I hit equals, I can hit this cell times this cell, right? It'll give you the value, right? So this is the output, right? This is the input, this formula, but the output is what Excel is showing, right? So equals, we can hit this times 3. Oops. Times this cell. And we're getting the same response, right? It appears to be the same. But let me use these buttons here, right? This is to decrease, this is the increase decimal, and this is the decrease decimal, right? So I want to increase decimals in this case, right? And increase here. Right? So let me show what was before, right? So if you ever get this in Excel, this signifies that there isn't enough room to show this number, right? If you get these dollar signs. So if you go in between, if you double click, it'll pull it as far as it needs to go for like the longest thing in that column, right? Or you can just pull it, right? You can just move this also until it doesn't show those anymore, right? But if you notice, these are not the same, right? These are not equivalent, right? This has nothing but zeros behind, where in this case we have a 1 here, right? So kind of my point here is that originally we started out where we had the same number as 6s and 7s, right? So when I pull this over, Excel wants to give more decimals, right? Because I entered in 11 thirds, right? Which 11 thirds is 3.666 repeating. But Excel will show you as many decimal places as it seems fit. And this 7 is coming from rounding, right? So that's actually a 6, but then there's a 6 coming next, so it rounds to 7. It's just to make it look nice, right? It's not actually the real value that's there, right? So my point is the values that are shown is not always the value that's stored, right? You can make numbers look differently than what's stored, right? So for example, I can decrease the number of decimal places here until this number rounds to 4, right? But 4 times 3 is 12, but this is still 11 with a bunch of dots behind it because it's still treating this as 11 thirds, right? It looks like 4, but it's not actually being used as 4, right? So it still has the same value, right? So we just gave this number a haircut, put makeup on it, right? Made it look different. Like I can change the color, right? So we can make it red. I can make it look like dollars, right? Percents. It's still the same value. I just change how it looks visually for us, right? But the computer treats the value the same, right? Alright, so that's all I have for this video. So if you have questions over this, feel free to email me, right? And then also, I just wanted to point out that, so right now I'm working on this column, the Intro to Excel, right? So don't forget to read these sections in the book. And then also, I'm going to put the Excel file I'm working with, I'm going to put it here for Excel file. But right under, I already added this Excel appendix. So if you click on this, download this. So I believe I got this for another Pearson text, if I'm not mistaken. But this is a good resource to have that walks through a lot of functionality in Excel also, right? So this will also be another good reference for you to learn how to use Excel, right? So it's real important that you get somewhat comfortable with Excel, at least how to enter a formula, how to cell reference, and we're going to keep building on these skills. And within a couple of weeks, you're gonna feel like a Excel expert, right? We're gonna do a lot of functionality with Excel. So this is just our medium, the application we're using to learn good mathematics, right? And you're gonna find it has a lot of usefulness and utility because we can work with big data sets and do like real life mathematics by using Excel rather than worrying about the computation like by hand. This will be a lot better resource for us, right? Alright, so again, if you have questions, email me, post in the questions about anything discussion board.